China has the largest navy in the world by ship count, 370 ships and submarines, according to the Pentagon's most recent annual report to Congress on Chinese military power, compared to approximately 294 American ships and submarines. China commissions new warships faster than any shipbuilding program in modern naval history. China has built more destroyers in the past decade than the United States built in the previous 3. China launched a new aircraft carrier in 2022 and another under construction. China's defense budget, while still below America's in absolute terms, has grown at double-digit annual rates for most of the past 3 decades. By the most obvious measure of naval power, the number of warships, China is winning. And yet, when Iran's navy was destroyed in 48 hours, the People's Liberation Army Navy was watching from a distance. When the carrier strike groups of the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford operated at combat tempo in the Arabian Sea and Red Sea for weeks, conducting sustained operations against a country with genuine anti-ship missile capability and a functioning, if modest, submarine force, no Chinese countermeasure proved effective against them. Not because China attempted anything, because China watched, calculated, and understood that what it was watching was a system it could not yet replicate, regardless of how many ships its yards were launching. Because the gap between the United States Navy and every other navy on Earth is not measured in ship counts. It is measured in the things that ship counts do not capture. It is measured in the 60-plus years of continuous nuclear-powered carrier operations that have built a culture of naval aviation safety and effectiveness that no other institution on Earth has yet acquired. It is measured in the 70 years of nuclear submarine operations that have produced a safety record unmatched by any other naval nuclear program in history. It is measured in the combat logistics force that can keep a carrier strike group at combat tempo anywhere on Earth for months without returning to port. It is measured in the institutional depth, the doctrine, the training pipeline, the maintenance culture, the professional military education system, and the operational experience that converts equipment into combat power. China can build ships. It cannot yet build what the ships are worth. This video is about why. Not as a celebration of American exceptionalism, though the achievements are exceptional. As a genuine analysis of what the United States Navy has built over 70 years that cannot be replicated quickly, regardless of how much money a competitor is willing to spend, and what the specific gaps are that China, Russia, and every other potential adversary faces when they try to match what American sea power actually consists of. The first and most fundamental gap is carrier aviation. The United States has operated nuclear-powered aircraft carriers continuously since the USS Enterprise entered service in 1961. 65 years. Every year of those 65 years has produced operational lessons, safety procedures, flight deck procedures, aircraft maintenance practices, and tactical doctrine that have been learned, refined, codified, and transmitted to the next generation of naval aviators and flight deck crews through a training pipeline that is decades deep and institutionally embedded at every level of naval aviation. The accident rate for American carrier aviation has declined dramatically over that 65-year period, from the terrible losses of the early jet age to the relatively low accident rates of the modern era. Each reduction in accident rate represents accumulated knowledge about how to operate powerful, dangerous, and complex aircraft from the world's most unforgiving operating environment. China has been operating aircraft carriers since the Liaoning, a refurbished Soviet-era hull, entered service in 2012. That is 14 years as of 2026. 14 years versus 65. In those 14 years, Chinese carrier aviation has been learning lessons that American naval aviation learned in the 1960s and 1970s and has been refining ever since. Chinese pilots are learning how to conduct carrier landings safely, how to manage flight deck operations without catastrophic accidents, how to sustain a high sortie rate without the kind of cumulative errors that lead to aircraft losses. These are lessons that can only be learned by doing them over years and decades in real operational conditions. There is no shortcut through investment or intention. You cannot buy operational culture. You have to grow it. The J-35 stealth fighter that launched from the Fujian's electromagnetic catapult in September 2025 was a genuine technological achievement and a genuine strategic signal. China demonstrated a capability that the United States has not yet deployed operationally from the ship designed for it. But the pilot who flew that J-35 off the Fujian did so at the leading edge of a carrier aviation force that has 14 years of continuous operations, rather than 65. The decision-making under pressure, the situational awareness under high workload, the ability to manage a degraded aircraft in the pattern and bring it aboard safely in adverse conditions, the accumulated institutional knowledge about what kills carrier pilots and how to prevent those deaths. These capabilities come from decades of operations that China's carrier aviation force has not yet had. The combat logistics force is the second fundamental gap, and it is the one that analysts outside the military most consistently underestimate. Projecting naval power over sustained periods requires more than ships and aircraft. It requires a logistics chain capable of delivering fuel, food, ammunition, spare parts, and personnel to those ships while they are at sea, far from their home ports, without requiring them to return to port to resupply. The American Combat Logistics Force, a network of oilers, dry cargo ships, ammunition ships, and combat stores ships that can conduct underway replenishment operations with carrier strike groups at sea, is the capability that makes sustained operations like Epic Fury possible. Without the CLF, the carriers and their escorts would have to return to port every 2 to 3 weeks to refuel, reprovision, and rearm, dramatically reducing the time on station that makes them strategically useful. The United States has been conducting underway replenishment operations continuously since World War II. The procedures, the training, the equipment, the safety standards, and the institutional culture for conducting these operations safely in any weather, day or night, in conditions ranging from calm Mediterranean to North Atlantic winter, have been refined over 80 years of continuous operations. The replenishment at sea operation, where an oiler and a warship steam in parallel 300 feet apart and fuel is transferred between them through hoses rigged between the ships, is one of the most demanding seamanship evolutions that any naval officer manages. It is safe because it has been done hundreds of thousands of times by people trained to do it, under procedures developed to prevent the accidents that killed sailors when it was first being learned. China's Navy has a logistics force. It has been developing underway replenishment capability as its blue water ambitions have expanded. Chinese replenishment ships have conducted operations in the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and in exercises with Russia in distant waters. But China's CLF is a fraction of the American CLF in both capacity and in operational experience. In a sustained campaign operating far from Chinese home ports, the logistics constraint would become apparent much faster for China than it does for the United States. This is not a constraint that money alone can fix. It requires years of operational experience and the institutional depth to make the procedures second nature under the stress of sustained operations. The submarine force is the third fundamental gap, and it is where the acoustic and safety culture dimensions intersect most critically. The United States has operated nuclear submarines continuously since 1955. 70 years. In those 70 years, no American nuclear-powered naval vessel has ever suffered a reactor accident that caused a radiation release affecting the public or resulted in deaths attributable to nuclear causes. That record is not simply a technical achievement. It is a cultural and institutional achievement, the product of the standards, the training, the oversight, and the personal accountability that Admiral Rickover built, and that the Naval Nuclear Propulsion Program has maintained with continuous attention for 7 decades. China has operated nuclear submarines since the 1970s. Its first nuclear submarine, the Type 09-1 Han class, entered service in 1974 and had a troubled operational history. Chinese submarines have experienced accidents, including at least one incident in 2003 that resulted in the deaths of the entire crew of a Type 035 Ming-class diesel submarine, ostensibly from an exhaust system malfunction. The Chinese nuclear submarine force has improved dramatically over the past 3 decades, both in capability and in safety. But the acoustic performance gap and the culture of nuclear operations safety reflect the difference between 70 years and 50 years of continuous operation. The Virginia class is quieter. The American nuclear propulsion safety culture is more deeply embedded. Both of these dimensions of undersea capability reflect accumulated institutional knowledge that cannot be acquired quickly, regardless of investment. The professional military education system is a less visible but equally significant source of American naval advantage. The Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, the Naval Academy in Annapolis, and the myriad other professional schools and advanced education programs through which American naval officers develop throughout their careers, collectively produce an officer corps whose strategic and operational education is among the deepest of any military institution in the world. The doctrine, the operational concepts, the wargaming methodologies, and the historical analysis that these institutions produce are not simply academic exercises. They are the intellectual foundation from which American naval officers make decisions in operational environments that are complex, ambiguous, and consequential. China's People's Liberation Army has invested significantly in its own military education institutions and has sent officers to study military science in foreign universities, including American ones. Its doctrine development has improved substantially over the past 2 decades. But the accumulated depth of American professional military education, built over decades in institutions that have been continuously updated with the lessons of real operations, represents an institutional advantage that is difficult to replicate from a standing start, regardless of how much intellectual talent and financial investment is directed at the problem. The intelligence and surveillance infrastructure represents another dimension of American advantage that does not appear in ship counts or budget comparisons. The United States operates the most capable military intelligence collection system in the world, combining satellite reconnaissance, signals intelligence, maritime patrol aircraft, submarine-based collection, and human intelligence sources to produce a picture of the global maritime environment that no other nation can match. This intelligence infrastructure is what allowed American forces to have a complete targeting picture of Iran's naval dispositions before the first strike of Epic Fury was authorized. It is what allows American submarines to find and track adversary submarines without being detected in return. It is what allows carrier strike groups to know where the threats are before those threats know the carrier strike group's positions. China is building its own intelligence and surveillance infrastructure, space-based reconnaissance, over-the-horizon radar, submarine-based collection, and a network of maritime militia vessels that operate throughout the South China Sea and beyond, collecting information on American and Allied naval movements. The Chinese intelligence apparatus is capable and improving. But the American system has been building for 70 years, has been continuously funded and updated, and is the product of a collection of agencies and services whose collaboration, while imperfect, produces a composite picture of the global maritime environment that no competitor has yet replicated. The alliance network is the final and perhaps most powerful source of American naval advantage, the one that is most often overlooked in purely military comparisons. The United States does not operate its Navy alone. Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force, one of the most capable blue water navies in Asia, operates in close coordination with American forces under the U.S.-Japan Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security. South Korea's Navy provides additional capability in the Pacific. Australia's commitment under AUKUS to acquire Virginia-class submarines represents a significant addition to the Allied undersea capability in the Indo-Pacific. The United Kingdom's Royal Navy, while reduced in size from its Cold War peak, provides carrier aviation capability and submarine force contributions to Allied operations. France, Canada, and other NATO allies provide surface combatants, maritime patrol aircraft, and logistics support that extend American naval reach without requiring American platforms to cover every mission. The alliance network is not simply a military multiplier. It is a strategic advantage that affects how and where potential adversaries must plan to engage American naval power. China does not face the United States Navy in a vacuum. It faces a network of allied navies operating under interoperable procedures, sharing intelligence, coordinating doctrine, and presenting a combined maritime capability that is substantially larger and more capable than any single nation's fleet. Russia faces the same network in the Atlantic. Iran faced it in the Middle East, where the carrier strike groups operated in coordination with Israeli, Saudi, and other regional partners whose contributions were less visible but operationally significant. What the United States Navy cannot easily replicate or sustain or replace if it is lost is the accumulated depth of operational experience, professional education, safety culture, alliance relationships, and institutional knowledge that has been built over 70 years of continuous global operations. China can build a ship. It can design a stealth fighter. It can commission an electromagnetic catapult carrier. It can invest in over-the-horizon radar and anti-ship missiles. All of these capabilities are real, all of them are concerning, and none of them alone bridges the gap that exists between the People's Liberation Army Navy and the United States Navy. The gap is not in hardware. It is in everything that surrounds the hardware and makes the hardware lethal, survivable, and sustainably effective in the environments where naval power is ultimately contested. China knows this. It has studied American naval operations with extraordinary intensity. It has sent officers to academic institutions that produce analysis of American doctrine and tactics. It has observed every major American naval campaign from the Gulf War to Epic Fury and drawn operational lessons about what American naval power does and what it requires. China is not building its Navy with naive optimism about its current capability relative to the United States. It is building with a clear understanding of where the gaps are and a strategic patience about the time required to close them. That patience is the most dangerous aspect of Chinese naval development, not the ship count, which is already in China's favor, not the specific weapons, which are impressive but not decisive, the patience to build operational experience 1 year at a time, to grow a carrier aviation culture decade by decade, to develop the logistics infrastructure that sustained blue water operations require, and to maintain the institutional commitment over the 20 to 30-year timeline that closing the capability gap actually requires. The United States has an advantage that is not self-perpetuating. It requires continued investment, continued operational engagement, continued institutional attention, and continued willingness to accept the costs of maintaining global forward presence. The Navy that dominated the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea in February 2026 is the product of 70 years of continuous operation. The Navy that will need to compete in the Pacific in 2035 will be the product of the decisions being made today. No country on earth can do what America's Navy does today. The question is whether America's commitment ensures that remains true in 2035. If you want to understand the specific trajectory of Chinese naval development, what capabilities China has already closed the gap on versus what will take another decade, and what the combination of AUKUS, Japan's naval expansion, and American Pacific posture means for the maritime balance in the Indo-Pacific, subscribe to Navy Power Decoded. The advantage is real, it is not permanent. The historical depth of American naval operational experience is captured in a single statistic that defense analysts use to make the point viscerally. The United States Navy has more aircraft carriers than any other navy in the world, and it has had more aircraft carriers than any other navy in the world continuously since 1942. 84 years of continuous carrier operations, 84 years of flight deck procedures, landing signal officer techniques, catapult maintenance practices, and aviation safety culture continuously refined through the accumulated experience of every accident, every near miss, every mishap that produced the lessons that prevented the next one. The Fujian's September 2025 J-35 launch was 14 years into China's carrier aviation journey. The USS Abraham Lincoln's F-35C launches over Iran in March 2026 were 24 years into that specific ship's operational life and 65 years into the continuous American carrier aviation tradition that the Abraham Lincoln represents. The technical achievement of electromagnetic catapult launch is real. The institutional depth that makes sustained combat operations from a carrier possible is not something that the launch of a single aircraft demonstrates. This distinction matters strategically because it defines what each carrier can actually accomplish in a sustained campaign rather than in a demonstration or an exercise. A carrier that can launch an aircraft in optimal conditions is not the same as a carrier that can maintain a 100-plus sortie per day rate continuously for 6 weeks in a combat environment, managing aircraft battle damage, crew fatigue, maintenance backlogs, supply chain constraints, and the accumulated stress of sustained operations against an adversary who is actively trying to defeat you. The Abraham Lincoln and the Gerald R. Ford have been doing exactly that since February 28, 2026. That is what 65 years of continuous carrier operations produces, not just the ability to launch, the ability to sustain. Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force contribution to the Allied maritime equation in the Pacific is an element of American naval advantage that deserves particular emphasis in any analysis of the strategic balance. Japan operates 8 destroyers capable of ballistic missile defense, equipped with the Aegis combat system and SM-3 interceptors. It operates 5 submarines of the Taige and Soryu classes, quieter diesel-electric boats whose acoustic performance in the shallow waters of the Japan and East China Seas provides a genuine undersea capability that complements American nuclear attack submarine operations. Japan's intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft, including the P-1 maritime patrol aircraft and various land-based systems, contribute to the common maritime picture that American and Japanese forces share under their alliance agreements. And Japan's government, under Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, who took office in October 2024, has adopted a security posture significantly more assertive than any previous Japanese government, with a defense budget commitment reaching 2% of GDP, roughly doubled from the 1% ceiling that constrained Japanese defense spending for decades. No other nation on Earth has what the alliance network around the United States Navy provides. Not just the additional ships, though those matter, the interoperability, the shared intelligence, the common doctrine, the decades of combined exercises and real operations that have produced allied forces capable of operating together in ways that go beyond coordination to genuine integration. China faces this network across the Pacific. Russia faces it in the Atlantic. Iran faced it in the Middle East. The network is the advantage that ship count comparisons do not capture. The United States cannot rest on this advantage. The gap is real, but it is not permanent. China is persistent, it is well-resourced, and it is patient. The institutional knowledge that cannot be bought quickly can be grown slowly if the will and the resources are sustained over the decades required. Every year that Chinese carrier aviation operates, it becomes more capable. Every year that China's nuclear submarine force operates, it becomes safer and quieter. Every year that China's logistics force conducts underway replenishment operations, it becomes more reliable. The clock is running. No Navy on Earth can do what America's Navy does today. The question that the next 10 years will answer is whether that statement remains true in 2035.